Welcome back. In this video, we'll go over updating the reconstruction of Olaland's subsistence and recreational catches. Subsistence catches, most of which are unreported, are comprised of the portion of the catch that artisanal fishers take home for family consumption or catches taken normally by gleaning women and/or non-commercial fishers for their own consumption. These catches are a crucial protein source. Besides the occasional dedicated subsistence study, sources of subsistence catch data may include household or dietary surveys that present seafood consumption data for a population. Such consumption data can only be used if it is not based on reported catch data but derived from independent data, meaning from actual consumption. One way to estimate subsistence catch is using the percentage of take-home catch subtracted from the total artisanal catch in a given fishery. Local experts may be a good source of information to get to this percentage. In the case of the snapper and jobfish fishery in Olaland, I found in the literature that 5% of the artisanal catch is taken home by fishers to feed their families. Thus, my calculations for 2022 looked like this. If total catch equals reported catch plus unreported catch, then total catch is the sum of 605 tons plus 60.5 tons, that is, 665.5 tons. Subsistence catch, on the other hand, is 5% by total catch. Thus, 5% multiplied by 665.5 tons equals 33.27 tons of subsistence catch of snapper and jobfish. If the research shows a rate of per capita take-home catch, then this rate would be multiplied by the number of artisanal fishers to obtain the subsistence catch. In Olaland, I know that the Karanjid artisanal fishery employed 2,398 people in 2022. I also know that each fisher takes home, on average, 0.22 tons of catch per year. Thus, my calculations show that if each fisher takes home 0.22 tons and there are 2,398 fishers, that's a total of 527 tons of catch taken home for family consumption in 2022. Subsistence catches can also be estimated by multiplying a per capita subsistence seafood consumption rate found through research by the total or coastal population. They can also be estimated by multiplying the yearly per subsistence fisher catch rate by the population participating in subsistence fishing. For example, in Olaland, it is known that there were 336 people who fished on foot or by diving along the country's coastline in 2015 and each caught 8.91 kilograms of sea cucumbers per fisher per year. Thus, total catch from this fishery in 2015 was 2.99 tons. One thing I noticed while reconstructing subsistence catches for Olaland was that I had to be very careful to not include freshwater catches, as sometimes freshwater fish are contained in the category fish and invertebrates in consumption data. If this is the case, then it is necessary to estimate a marine consumption rate from overall fish consumption rate. This can be done by finding information on freshwater catches and aquaculture production, as well as on imports and exports, and then subtracting the amounts corresponding to the industrial and artisanal sectors from the total catch to get subsistence catches. For example, in Olaland, I have data on snapper consumption, aquaculture production, and import amounts for 2011 to 2022. What I did was subtract the amount of aquaculture production and imports from the total consumption to find the amount of consumption of wild-caught snapper. I then subtracted the reported artisanal amount from the wild-caught snapper consumption amount to get the unreported subsistence amount. For 2022, I estimated the wild-caught snapper consumption by subtracting the following: total snapper consumption minus snapper aquaculture production minus imported snapper. In other words, 808.46 tons of total snapper consumption minus 4.76 tons of snapper aquaculture production minus 35.8 tons of imported snapper equals 767.9 tons of wild-caught snapper consumption. To estimate unreported subsistence snapper catches, the formula was wild-caught snapper consumption minus reported artisanal catch. Thus, unreported subsistence snapper catches result from the 767.9 tons of wild-caught snapper consumption minus 600 tons of reported artisanal snapper catches. I also found out that people in some remote communities in Olaland catch invertebrates such as octopuses for their own consumption, but I wasn't able to find any dedicated studies for those areas. Thus, based on what happens in neighboring countries, I derived conservative catch rates per person per day. After considering that women are typically the ones who fish for subsistence and that there are other alternative sources of income for women in more recent years, I was able to estimate the number of subsistence fishers in the remote communities. Finally, to calculate the total amount of subsistence catch by remote communities, I multiplied the number of subsistence fishers by the average catch rates and 72 days, assuming that they fish 3 times a week during half of the year. Moving on to the reconstruction of recreational catches, first I'm going to define what this sector is. The recreational sector consists of fisheries conducted mainly for pleasure, thus, it is non-commercial by nature. However, a fraction of the catch may end up being sold or consumed by the recreational fishers and their families. Normally, countries don't submit to the FAO information about this sector, nor data on catch and release mortalities, and this happens to be the case for Olaland. One thing to keep in mind here is that most data on recreational catches are by number of fishes caught and or kept, thus careful conversion to weight is required. Also, because subsistence and recreational catches overlap as fishers consume their recreational catch, I have to be very careful not to double count. To estimate recreational catches in Olaland, I can use several methods. First, I can multiply tourism arrivals by per capita participation rate in recreational fishing by per capita recreational catch, which would give me total recreational catch. One example is, for the years 2011 to 2016, I estimated total recreational catch by estimating the number of recreational fishers based on tourism data and catch rates per fisher per fishing day. To estimate the number of recreational fishers, I multiplied the total number of tourists by the percentage of tourists who fish recreationally. For 2011, for example, this is 41,600 people by 1% equals 416 people. The recreational catch is, thus, estimated by multiplying the number of recreational fishers by the average number of fishing days by the average catch per fisher per day. In this case, I estimated the recreational catch for 2011 by multiplying the 416 fishers from the previous calculation by 7 days by 27.7 kilograms of catch per fisher per day, which equaled 80.66 tons of recreational catch. Another option would be to multiply the number of recreational licenses by the per capita recreational catch to get total recreational catch, which I did to estimate recreational catch for 2017 to 2022. For 2017, I estimated the recreational catch of Olaland by multiplying the number of recreational licenses for boats by the average catch per boat per year. This means that the recreational catch for 2017 is the result of 260 licenses multiplied by 599.2 kilograms for a total of 155.79 tons of catch. If I were to account for catch and release, then I would determine total recreational catch by using one of the methods I previously described, For example, multiplying per capita number of recreational licenses by the per capita recreational catch, and then multiplying this by the proportion of catch and release by the proportion of mortality from catch and release. In some cases, and for every sector, I wasn't able to use these methods to estimate catches for every year, so I developed anchor points. In other words, the total catch amounts of the years for which I have both the reported and unreported components became anchor points for that specific sector. Once I did this, I interpolated between the anchor point years to get complete time series. Interpolations can be done linearly or assumption-based for the industrial and artisanal sectors, and generally via per capita or per fisher catch rates for the subsistence and recreational sectors. By interpolating between the anchor point years, which means taking the slope between those points to figure out how the catch changed over time, I can fill out what the catch is for every year. For example, in my calculation of remote communities' subsistence catch, I had to estimate the number of people who live in coastal areas. I was only able to find anchor points for the percentage of coastal population for 2011 and 2022, which is why I had to interpolate linearly to get the percentage of coastal population for the years in between. One thing to keep in mind is that sometimes an anchor point pertaining to a fraction of the coastline of a given country may need to be expanded to a country as a whole using fisher or population density or relative inshore fishing area or shelf area as raising factors as appropriate. As I mentioned before, important societal and socioeconomic and environmental events such as wars, economic collapse, civil unrest, tsunamis, destructive storms, pandemics, etc., should be considered. For example, if the country experienced economic collapse in a given year, catches in the subsistence sector are likely to be higher than under normal conditions. The next step I'm going to describe in this video is the disaggregation of catch. To paint a clear picture of what needs to be done, I'll first go over the final spreadsheet I will build with the data I've obtained and processed and following the standards set up by the sea around us. This spreadsheet includes the following columns. Fishing entity means who is doing the fishing. EEZ refers to in which EEZ fishing is occurring or whether it's happening outside the EEZ or in the high seas. FAO area refers to which FAO area the EEZ falls within. Layer. I have to input 1 if fishing by a country's domestic fleet is taking place within a country's home EEZ, or input 2 if catches in a country's EEZ are taken by foreign fleets. Layer 3 corresponds to industrial tuna and tuna-like catches, and those should be included in a different spreadsheet under the guidance of a Sea Around Us researcher. Sector means industrial, artisanal, subsistence, or recreational. Catch type means landings or discards. Reporting status means unreported or reported. Year, taxon name, amount. Input type can be either reconstructed or the source of reported data such as FAO, national data, etc. Gear type. If recreational, I have to type recreational gear. Same with subsistence, although I can specify, for example, pole and line, hand line, and so on, if I have this information. If artisanal, I should specify the type of gear, whether it's a small-scale trammel net, a bag net, pots, or traps, and so on. And if industrial, I'd have to specify, for example, if it's a trawl, what type, if it's an encircling net, what type, etc. RFMO statistical area the EEZ falls within. Original country fishing is a column to fill out if there's reflagging, that is, changing the flag of a foreign-owned vessel for the host country's flag. There are columns on EEZ sub-area, sub-regional area, province, or state, which I can fill out if I have such information. Original sector, which I would fill out if I find out that a type of vessel, such as baby trawlers, is considered artisanal in my country but industrial by sea around us parameters. Original taxon name is a species local name. Original FAO name. The name FAO gives the species, which will allow me to check my reconstructed data versus the reported baseline. Adjustment factor. If the validity of the reported data is questionable, I need to adjust the reported catch amount down to reflect what might be the true catch. The adjustment factor is a number that would allow me to convert back to the originally questionable data reported. Forward carry rule is a column used by the Sea Around Us team when they semi-automatically reconstruct data. Disaggregation rule is the method taken to disaggregate a group's catch retroactively, for example, following species composition based on a more detailed national statistics by using the catch sums of the FAO reported data. And finally, the notes column, where I can add any information I deem relevant. To start working on this final spreadsheet, I will begin by looking at the reported catch by taxon and assigning a sector based on my research. This means that I will have to decide what sector the catch belongs to based on what species is caught, or if I have other relevant data, like catch per gear type, then this will tell me what sector that catch can be assigned to. For example, I was able to easily assign all reported shrimp catches as industrial and all reported snapper, jobfish, and crab catches as artisanal based on information from national data. If there's no other info, I will maintain the sector breakdown by taxon from the original reconstruction. Once the reported catch has been disaggregated by sector, I will add the unreported component to each sector based on the ratios found in the literature. Here, I have added the unreported catch that I have calculated in video 4. Another option here would be to separate total reconstructed catch into reported and unreported components by sector using the formula I mentioned on video 4. Total catch minus reported catch equals unreported catch. If the catch is reported in broad taxonomic groups, then I will have to apply a taxonomic breakdown based on what I found in the literature and make sure that the sum of each species matches the total reported by FAO for that broader group. For example, I noticed that the shrimp catches are associated with 3 species: Paneus indicus, Metapaneus monniceros, and Paneus semisulcatus. I was able to find the proportions of these 3 species for each year and applied them to the total catch for the corresponding year. Looking at my unreported catch data, I also noticed that in some cases, I will have to derive the taxonomic breakdown from anchors of catch by species in weight, which I found in the literature. For example, using a report from a survey on shrimp discards that lists the weight per discarded species, I took the proportion for each species by weight and applied the species breakdown to the discards amount that I calculated in video 4. In other cases where information is scarcer, I will use the reported species breakdown. For example, I couldn't find new information on species breakdown for crab catches and decided to apply the proportions for reported catch to the unreported catch amounts. Finally, the industrial and artisanal catch should be disaggregated by gear. Since I didn't find new or more specific information, I maintained the gear breakdown per sector, per species from the previous reconstruction update. Final notes to self. Once I've disaggregated my catch, I have to check that totals per year per component of the catch in the final database file match what I have in the working files used for calculations. Another thing I'll do is plot totals by sector and by taxon to check for catch patterns that raise red flags, like unexplained spikes or drops that may be indicative of an error in the data. For example, I found a spike in the recreational data in 2021, for which I had no explanation based on my research. Thus, I went back to my spreadsheet and found that I have made a mistake during data entry. I then recalculated the total recreational catch for 2021 using the correct average catch rate. As mentioned in video 1, the sixth step in the catch reconstruction update is to harmonize the new time series of total catch with the time series produced during the previous update. If the time series match or the differences are minimal, they can be smoothed out by applying a 5-year back running average. If the time series don't match by a large amount but the taxonomic groupings are the same, it could be that a given fishery was not included in the previous update. This would have to be investigated and corrected retroactively as explained in video 3. If the time series of total catches don't match both in terms of their amount and by taxa, the original reconstruction and its subsequent updates would have to be thoroughly reviewed to identify where the error originated and fix it. The next step in the catch reconstruction updating process is to quantify uncertainty. As I gathered data to address the unreported component of the catch, some sources of information seemed to be less certain than others. When there wasn't a lot of information from official sources and I had to resort to gray literature and assumptions to reconstruct missing components of the catch, I used the Sea Around Us uncertainty score table to reflect the quality of such information. As I went about doing this, I had to consider whether the material I was using accurately reflects the area, sector, or fisheries component to be represented. For example, a study of one port or landing site may not reflect an entire country, or a study of seafood consumption in rural coastal regions may not represent the seafood consumption rate of urban populations. This means that I had to clearly specify the assumptions I had to make to use those materials as sources of data. Consequently, the procedure consists of attributing a score for each catch estimate by sector per 5-year period. The quality of the time series can be 1. Very low, which means there is less than high agreement and less than robust evidence supporting the data. 2. Low, which means there is high agreement but limited evidence, medium agreement and medium evidence, or low agreement and robust evidence. 3. High, which means there is high agreement and medium evidence, or medium agreement and robust evidence. And 4. Very high, which refers to data with high agreement and robust evidence. A medium score is absent to avoid the non-choice that this easy option would represent. As I mentioned before, to estimate subsistence catches of remote communities, I had to use data from neighboring countries to get a conservative estimate of subsistence catch rate. As I consulted with local experts, all agreed on, however, there was not a lot of official sources or studies backing up the information they provided. To estimate the score for the reconstructed total catch of a sector and/or period, I computed the mean of the scores for each sector, weighed by their catch. I'm done for now. These are the basics of my reconstruction update of Olaland's marine fisheries catches. As I looked at other reconstructions to learn more and find examples, I noticed that each reconstruction has its own specificities. When in doubt, the best thing to do is to reach out to the Sea Around Us team via feedback@seaaroundus.org. They gladly guided me on how to address specific issues. Good luck with your reconstruction update.